With much delay, I present to you a selection of albums released between January 16th and January 31st, 2024, and already a serious contender for the best album of 2024. The Rods is a veteran band that traversed the entire 1980s, playing in numerous major festivals in Europe and the United States. Sometimes dubbed the American Motorhead, they have always played straightforward and simple heavy metal, drawing a bit of influence from bands like Manowar. Rattle the Cage continues in the same vein as their discography, with the Rods not attempting to explore other genres or introduce innovations. The band has been delivering powerful and no-frills heavy metal since 1980, picking up their career where they left off in 1987. Since their reunion in 2010, they have released 4 albums, all very well received, and the latest is no exception. If you enjoyed the band's music in the past, you won't be surprised or disappointed. The energy is still there, evident from the first track, Now and Forever. The scene is set with an ultra-effective guitar riff, a solid rhythm section, and a catchy chorus against the backdrop of an organ. The rest of the album unfolds in a similar fashion with some touches of doom, hard rock in certain tracks, and even punk metal in the magnificent and aptly named Play It Loud. The album also features direct nods to the 1970s and 1980s, with Cry Out Loud approaching the style of Black Sabbath's Heaven and Hell, or some tracks by Manowar. Hell or High Water is almost a tribute to Man on the Silver Mountain. It's worth noting that David Feinstein is Ronnie James Dio's cousin and was a member of the band Elf. My favorite track, Play It Loud, and the one I like the least, Shockwave, which is still a good track, just slightly less impressive than the others. As the name of the band suggests, Autumn's Child, founded in 2020, is in the lineage of Last Autumn's Dream, which itself had a connection to Europe. The common factor is the prolific singer and keyboardist Mikael Erlandsson, who is active in both Swedish groups. In this 5th album of the band, we find the recipe of the previous works, powerful and melodic AOR, sometimes a bit repetitive. However, the band allows itself some slightly more robust tracks, like Gates of Paradise, and some songs are strongly influenced by the Beatles or the glam rock of the 70s, with nods to Slade, Sweet, and even passages reminiscent of Queen. And a few missed tracks, like Here Comes the Night, which would fit better in the discography of ABBA, or Juliet with its overly intrusive brass section. In the end, a rather average album with a first part that is quite homogeneous and successful, containing the best tracks, Gates of Paradise, We Are Young, and Strike of Lightning, and a second part that is very eclectic, resembling a tribute to the 60s and 70s and artists like the Beatles, ELO, Slade, Sweet, and Queen. My favorite track, Gates of Paradise, and the one I like the least, Juliet. The second album for the Swedes follows the same recipe as the first. Very accessible and all-encompassing AOR melodic rock, a bit more aggressive than the debut. Influences are numerous and well integrated, with shades of Toto, Giant, and Foreigner, crafting music tailored for the radio. If you enjoyed the first album, you'll undoubtedly enjoy this one too. It features the superb vocals of Mattias Olofsson, beautifully arranged melodies like on the ballad Lily, and some quite successful guitar solos, especially on tracks like Leave No Scar or All or Nothing. In the end, an eclectic album, successful without being revolutionary, that will delight fans of well-produced and well-arranged melodic rock. For those who prefer more aggressive music, this might not be their cup of tea. My favorite track, Achilles' Heel, and the one I like the least is Crash and Burn. This album indeed hails from Germany and is from 2024, yet it could easily find its place in the latter half of the 80s in California. The influences are clearly embraced, ranging from Wasp, Dokken, Kingdom Come, Rat, Motley Crue, to Skid Row, etc. It's a bit unfortunate that one might get the feeling of listening to a tribute band spanning heavy metal, hard rock, with elements of glam and sleaze. Without being unpleasant, the album lacks originality and personality, except for a few tracks like Torture Me or Velvet Snakeskin. It's an album for fanatics of the 80s that you could slip between Motley Crue and Keel. Personally, I find their debut album, Cobra Tour, much better. My favorite track is Torture Me, and the one I like the least is Ride My Rocket. Hellfire and Damnation is the 27th studio album in Saxon's career, which has had its ups and downs since the early 80s. Carpe Diem in 2022 was quite convincing, and this new album continues in the same vein, at least no bad surprises. Saxon still produces very classic heavy metal. However, if the first part of the album is quite successful, except for the very predictable Fire and Steel, the last 4 tracks are laborious and not very exciting. It's a mixed bag, an album that doesn't quite sustain the momentum, although nothing is truly bad and nothing is exceptional either. My favorite track, Kubla Khan and the Merchant of Venice, and least favorite Witches of Salem. Gotus is a kind of supergroup from Switzerland, bringing together former members of Gotthard and Crocus, hence the name of the band, accompanied by the omnipresent Ronnie Romero. Heavily influenced by the 80s and 70s, the group operates in the heavy rock genre, and the talent and experience of the musicians do the rest on perfectly mastered mid-tempo tracks. A successful debut album with no weak or filler tracks, enjoyable from start to finish, with just the right amount of keyboards to enhance some songs. And of course, a superb ballad, Children of the Night, with chords reminiscent of Stairway to Heaven. My favorite track, Beware of the Fire, and the one I like the least, When the Rain Comes. The Gems is the new project of 3 former members of Thunder Mother, and Phoenix is their debut album that oscillates between groovy and bluesy hard rock and classic rock. Guernica Mancini's vocals are still as pleasant, just powerful and aggressive enough to fit perfectly with the hard rock and roll of her 2 companions. The negative point is the inclusion of 3 interludes that add nothing and break the rhythm and unity of the album. Otherwise, it's very classic with very marked influences from the 70s and 80s, AC/DC, Thin Lizzy, Foghat, Dire Straits, and for a debut album, it's quite promising. My favorite track, Undiscovered Paths, and the one I like the least, Fruits of My Labor. Don't be fooled by the cover. This album is not horror western metal, but indeed energetic, melodic, catchy heavy metal that is very enjoyable to listen to. It's the 4th album from the American band, and it's arguably their most accomplished, with fantastic work on the guitars, be it the riffs or solos. It takes several listens to grasp all the subtleties and variations between the 2 guitars. This album is incredibly rich, covering a wide musical spectrum from hard rock, heavy, power, to thrash metal in a most enchanting sonic alchemy. My favorite track is Outrun Infinity, and the one I like the least is Take to the Skies. After 2 less convincing albums, we were eagerly awaiting Lucifer's return, and they come back with arguably their best opus, a heavy, doom-infused rock heavily inspired by the 70s. The sound and mixing carry a vintage vibe, adding to the charm of this 5th album. In terms of compositions, it kicks off with the energetic and swirling Fallen Angel. We then move to a more doom and slightly pop-infused track with At the Mortuary, one of the best pieces on the album. Riding Reaper is equally impressive, with meticulously crafted guitar work and the consistently enchanting, slightly pop-infused voice of Johannes Adonis. The subsequent track, Slow Dance in a Crypt, is a gem, a beautiful bluesy ballad reminiscent of a blend between Janis Joplin and Alice Cooper. The rest of the album is just as refined, both in terms of guitars and Johannes Adonis' crystalline vocals, with some riffs and melodies recalling the style of Blue Oyster Cult. In the end, it's a very cohesive album that reconnects with the excellence of Lucifer 2. My favorite track is At the Mortuary, and the one I like the least is Strange Sister. Of Sins and Other Tales is the third album by the Bulgarian band Project Arcadia, and if you're not familiar with this group, it's high time to delve into their music. After two solid albums in 2009 and 2014, it took 10 years for this new opus, but the wait was worth it because this album is close to perfection. Their music is challenging to define as it is incredibly rich, sitting between melodic heavy and power metal with influences from hard rock and progressive metal. All the musicians are excellent, from the Annihilator rhythm section of Rich Gray and Fabio Alessandrini. Listen to the rhythmic complexity on the portrait, it's phenomenal. The two guitarists, Plamen Uzunov and Milcho Kolev, fill the space with breathtaking solos and capable of delivering unstoppable riffs like Into My Muse and The Hourglass. As for the new singer, Davies Artigas, he manages the feat of making you forget Urban Breed with his warm, powerful, sensual, and highly melodic voice. In my opinion, it will be challenging to dethrone Of Sins and Other Tales as the album of the year for 2024. It will take enormous talent in songwriting and technical excellence to compete with this masterpiece. There's no particular standout track as they are all excellent, but Of Sins Part 3 Greed remains my favorite.